Back to another episode of Behind The Touchline. With me today I have is Matt Homonoff, COO of the Union Omaha. How are you today, Matt?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
No, for sure, Matt. It's always a pleasure. I know we've been sort of exchanging a few messages, throughout, the past couple of months. So it's finally nice to meet you sort of in person, quote unquote.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, Matt. So just tell me more about how you got into the sports industry in the first place, because I know you're currently, again, the COO of Union Omaha. And of course, we're going to touch upon that. But how did you sort of come into this realm of, as we know, soccer here in the U.S.?
Sure. So there's no short version of this, but I'll try and be as concise as possible. Way back in 2003, I started as an entry-level sales representative for DC United in Major League Soccer. DC United, obviously one of the flagship teams of MLS. It was a great opportunity, and literally got in on the ground floor, and had cold calling experience from some of my previous positions in lobbying and government relations. I had only been out of college just about 2.5 years at that point. So it was a real chance to chase my passion. 7 years later, I was still at DC United. Had a phenomenal opportunity to be with that MLS team during some real highs, notably in 2004. Which was Freddie Adu's rookie year, as well as the MLS Cup championship for the club that year, and some lows too, some lean years where the team did not succeed on the field and didn't live up to its high standards off the field either, in terms of crowds and overall community impact. So overall, it was a great learning experience and prepared me well for the roles that I would take on later. After the 2009 season in MLS, I realized that the opportunity for advancement there just simply wasn't there, and took an agency job nearby in Arlington, Virginia. But after a couple of years doing that, I just realized I simply missed soccer too much, and took the assistant general manager role, along with director of sales and marketing for FC Edmonton in what was then the NASL. FC Edmonton has since moved over to the Canadian Premier League, but it was a great opportunity to step into a real leadership role with a fledgling team. They were only in their second full season and had a great year there. We were really ready to settle in Edmonton. But as I learned, when your wife's hometown team offers you the general manager job, you get on the plane. And my very young family and I decided to move to Des Moines, where I became the general manager of the Des Moines Menace, just in time for, it was the end of 2012, so it would be for the start of the 2013 season. The Des Moines Menace played in the PDL, which has since been renamed USL League 2, and had 5 phenomenally successful years there, both on and off the field. So great crowds and fan support, making the playoffs 4 out of the 5 years. Had a great US Open Cup run where we upset Minnesota United FC,
Wow.
who I believe at the time they were still in the NASL, but had already announced that they were moving to MLS. And that upset earned Des Moines and our players, who of course were all college players for the most part, the chance to go down to Sporting Kansas City and play SKC at Sporting Park.
Wow.
So that was an incredible highlight, just a great opportunity for the franchise, as well as me personally. But after 5 years with the Menace, at the time, there were no plans to, quote unquote, go pro. And I felt strongly that the team needed to be there for the continued growth of the game in the Des Moines market. So I looked for other opportunities. And that's what ultimately led me to Omaha. Great opportunity to get in again with a team that didn't even have a brand yet. So in the spring of 2019, more specifically April of 19, I became the chief operating officer for Union Omaha. and led the club through the process of establishing a brand and establishing a foothold in a community that I think anyone who's been there will tell you was as hungry for a pro team to call their own as any community in the country. Of course, the following spring, March of 2020, we all know how the landscape changed for virtually everyone and every type of business. So we adjusted on the fly and ultimately had a shortened season. Instead of a 28-game USL League One campaign with 6 teams making the playoffs, we ended up with a 16 game schedule that kicked off at the end of July. And it was a great opportunity to still put into practice what we had been prepping for. But it by no means was it the full experience that we were all hoping for an inaugural season. With the truncated season, only the top 2 in the standings would end up making the League One final, with one hosting 2. And in incredibly dramatic fashion, we scored a 90th minute winner on the last, virtually the last kick of the regular season to clinch that second spot and therefore travel to Greenville for the USL League One final. But as I'm sure most of your listeners are aware, we got hit really hard with positive tests in the lead up to the final, and ultimately that game was not able to be played. So a second place finish is still something that I think in retrospect and in the totality of the story of 2020 will be looked at as a great success. But to say that there's unfinished business is not an understatement.
Right, no, for sure, and I appreciate you, giving sort of your history, if you will, of your career, leading up to Omaha. So why wasn't the final postponed? Because again, like a big event such as one like a final, right, especially in the top league in the the USL1, why wasn't the final simply pushed back a little more?
It's a good question. 2 main reasons. One of which is it's important to remember that teams, were losing money left and right. 2020 was not about making money or even breaking even. It was about how much are you going to lose. So the ownership of League One, the League One Board of Governors, had agreed ahead of time that if the season did need to be canceled early, that the championship would ultimately be decided upon by the regular season standings, whether it was points per game or whatever the case may be at that point. So obviously the regular season had concluded. The second reason, which is obviously related, is cost. The cost of keeping the players in market and housed and fed and practices would have been significant, to say the least. We don't know exactly how much to the penny, of course, because we didn't do it. But it's important to remember that there was no guarantee, even by quarantining them for the 2 weeks necessary, that, and then let's say getting in, for argument's sake, another week of practice to ultimately play the final, what would have been over 3 weeks later at the least, that we would have been able to do it. And at the time, it seemed to be a very difficult decision. But in retrospect, it was the obvious one because, again, there were no guarantees. Many events since then, notably just 48 hours later when the USL Championship final ended up being canceled for the exact same reason, with Tampa, the host, coming down with a lot of positive tests results. And all of the other soccer and sporting events that have been canceled as a result of the virus since, all served to illustrate that at that point there really isn't any other responsible choice to make when it comes to everything from TV windows to advertising to fans to the players' health and safety, timing, contracts, just so many things, all together taken together meant that it was just not realistic to play the game.
No, that makes a lot of sense, man, when you put it that way. Like you said, in retrospect, looking back, it was the right decision. But in the moment, you just want to play that final, as I'm sure a lot of fans, across the states wanted to see as well. I also
Yes.
did, and just kind of going off of what we just talked about as well. I'm not sure if you can talk about this, but is Omaha in a state, where they'll be able to survive this? And even though this was your first year, of course, because, I've seen another team in the USL Championship already cease operations. There's rumors of potentially other teams, following suit. Hopefully not, right? But are you guys sort of in a state where, you guys will be good to go for next year?
Without a doubt, the ownership group in Omaha is incredibly committed, led by the managing partner Gary Green and locally by Dan Houghton. Incredibly committed to the long-term success. They've been very open about that fact, and this is, I think, in the long-term story, going to be considered a bump in the road, a very big bump. No getting around that. But there's no doubt that the ownership has communicated very clearly to everyone involved, staff, players, the community overall, that they are here for the long term.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the community as well. Going over, we were talking about your career. What in particular? I'm not sure. Obviously, you didn't make the decision to go to make a team rather in Omaha, Nebraska. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, I'm from New Jersey, right? So we're heavily populated over here, tri-state area. Whereas, places like, Nebraska, not as populated, but there was a need for soccer there, you said, right? Just tell me more about that and the community there and how you sort of plan on involving that fan base. I know it's particularly hard this year because, again, I'm not sure if you had fans in the stand, but I know over here there wasn't any fans. So just talk to me more about that.
Sure. So, dating back to late July, we ultimately had our first home game on August 1st. And with all of the county health regulations, we were restricted to a capacity of just over 2,000. So the restricted capacity allowed us to have between 23 and 2,500 fans per game, which was obviously way down from the capacity of 8,900 and the stated goal of 5,000 to 7,000 per game. So take all that into account, and it made for a very difficult situation. We had done great with season tickets up to mid-March, when obviously we stopped selling them because at that point we didn't know what the schedule was ultimately going to look like. I can't say enough about the fan base and the way they reacted. This is a fan base that has always supported soccer at other levels in the city and in the Omaha metro. Creighton University and more recently University of Nebraska Omaha, UNO, are phenomenal Division I men's programs. Youth soccer is growing, thriving in the market, and just overall, it's a soccer town, and anyone who lives there can tell you that. But the missing piece, of course, the crown jewel, is the pro team. Something for everyone to rally around and get behind and ensure that there's that one logo, that one commonality that makes the most sense. So in when the story of 2020 is written, I think the fans are in that very first sentence, about how incredible their passion and devotion was and support. And for the most part, their understanding as to the limitations of the quote unquote show that we could put on. Obviously Warner Park was designed for baseball. And we did a great job with the conversion. The grounds crew and operations staff deserve a tremendous amount of credit for the way they moved everything around and ultimately created a soccer environment. And any fan that attended one of our games this year will I'm sure tell you the same thing. But at the end of the day, not having the ability to have 100% capacity obviously affected things. The environment and the enthusiasm, the electricity in the park was great for every game, especially that home opener. No one will ever forget that, despite the fact that it was delayed for an hour because of a crazy rain and lightning storm. But the idea that we did sell out our restricted capacity for each one of the 8 home games, we were able to, regardless of weather challenges and obviously the social distancing requirements and just the impact of COVID overall, I think are big parts to the success story.
No, for sure. And talk to me more about sort of the role you play in with Omaha, because obviously, CEO, that's a position, but with, the hats that multiple hats that you wear within every organization and club is different, right? So tell me more about what the roles are that you play with Omaha.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the easiest way to describe my position is to make sure that everyone associated with the club have the tools they need to succeed at their job. And that's both on the business side as well as on the playing side. So whether it's providing leadership to the front office staff, sales, marketing, communications, and community relations, whether it's the coaching staff and scouting and recruiting, equipment management and purchasing, supplies, facilities, you name it. If it has our logo on it, I'm ultimately responsible for it. So that's the brief version. Happy to touch on any one of those aspects a little bit more if you're interested, but that's the overall perspective.
Right. And then sort of so I actually did want to touch upon like more specifics too in regards to like, are you at all involved in anything regarding player development and that aspects? Obviously you have your coaches and stuff like that, but do you also work with them as well and trying to find, a key young talent, for example, and try, get them to Omaha?
Absolutely. So yeah, a big part of League One is player development. Half the league are MLS reserve teams. That is clearly their stated goal. They obviously prioritize developing players for their first teams more so than any other aspect of their business, including winning games. And I think you just need to look at the standings over the first 2 years now of League One to really see that. The notable outlier there is North Texas SC, the reserve team of FC Dallas, who have obviously won the championship, won the League One final in back in 2019, and then this past year finished just behind us in third place in the final standings. So they probably do the best job in terms of the combination of player development and on the field success. But in terms of the model that Omaha is putting forth, it's why can't we have our cake and eat it too? Why can't we develop young talent and win on the field and serve our community and be a great brand for advertisers and fans to all rally around? So we really did try to have it all and do it all, despite the obvious limitations of a COVID affected year. But when it comes to player development, the long-term strategy, of course, is to get more involved in the local youth scene and ultimately run camps and clinics and academy programming. We did dip our toe in the water back in the fall of 2019 by putting together a team of local youth talent for the USL Academy Cup, which was a great opportunity for us to introduce our brand new logo and brand to fans and give it was a U16 team, so give some local youth players an opportunity of really a lifetime down in San Antonio for the West Region event. But ultimately, we know that there's so much more a pro club can do, just not right away. It's one of those Rome wasn't built in a day situations where it's going to take time to build trust among the local youth soccer community and really understand how and where and why we can best serve in a leadership capacity in conjunction with the state association to help grow the game because we absolutely know that that's a big part of our mandate.
No, for sure. And then I think that the aspect of player development attributes to, success, even within a shortened season, of course, right? I'm sure you would have had the same success, maybe not, maybe you would have actually won the final, right? If you had a normal season. Also, I want to talk to you about, too, the USL1 in general, right? Because we're talking a lot about player development. How do you think the league compares to, like, those lower tiers, in Europe, for example, right? Because, for example, USL1 is, right, Division 3 here in the U.S., I think that compares to, for example, to a Division 3 in a European country. And do you see it ever reaching the point of those, leagues out there in Europe?
Eventually, the answer is yes. without a doubt. But it's important to remember those divisions and league structures, supported by promotion and relegation, of course, have been around for decades. Whereas, the USL is just now building out this third division model. This was supposed to be the second season. So there's so many differences. I don't even know where to begin. The compensation for the players is obviously not there in the short term. Players are on, relatively speaking, very low wages. The franchise model basically forces teams to look at their businesses for revenue generation opportunities in a different way. We all hear stories from overseas of clubs, who sell a young player for millions of dollars, once every 10, 20, 30 years, whatever it is. And then that profit ends up funding the club for X number of years, and allows them to absorb losses in other aspects of their business. But in the US, we don't have that history, right? MLS has evolved into a league that while they do have some great sales under their belt, by and large, they're not paying transfer fees either inside the U.S. or from outside the U.S. for their star talent, their homegrowns. And that's one of the big stories around MLS academies and just youth soccer overall. So without solidarity payments and with the lack of an infrastructure here in the U.S. That supports player development efforts in the way that you see outside the U.S. and Canada, it forces a different business model. So things like ticket sales, sponsorship and advertising sales, of course, television rights, media rights, all of those things are much more important to the conversation relative to profit and loss and the way that businesses are run, these teams are run, than they are in other countries where where more often than not, those things can be, where more often than not, those things can ultimately be, I don't want to say papered over, but just looked at differently.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna ask you this first, but I'm gonna ask you in regards to if you're in favor of promotion relegation. But before that, I think that I'm in favor of promotion relegation because, again, you talked about it. Like, my opinion, you're capped off, right? Because you have your advertising, you have your ticket sales, TV rights, but you can only make so much money with that, right? You can only sell out all the seats that you have available at your stadium. You only have so many advertising opportunities, TV deals. So I really think, again, even from that business model aspect, I think promotion, relegation, and being able to sell your players off for a profit, it's a big thing. I think probably not in the immediate future. In the immediate future, it will happen here, but I certainly would suggest, to the MLS and to the USL to certainly consider that for, maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, whatever it may be. But, I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'll freely admit that any fan of the game, and I certainly consider myself a fan, would be supportive overall of promotion and relegation. There are great stories and incredible drama every year of teams avoiding the drop, of teams squeaking in, of teams ultimately, on that last day, that last kick, whatever it is, having something to play for. Because I've been part of teams where you have to play out some quote unquote meaningless games at the end of the season, and that's no fun for anyone. That's really tough. So I'm certainly in favor from a fan development perspective of promotion and relegation. That being said, it's not my money, right? It's the owner's money. And, when you look at the franchise valuations in MLS, for example, how do you rationalize the franchise tag of an MLS team right now being X hundred millions of dollars? The last number I heard was north of 400, and that's not even with a stadium. Relative to the values of a Premier League club, of a recently promoted Premier League club in the English Premier League, the most profitable league in the world. And the only answer that makes sense to most people is that when you remove the threat of relegation, you come up with a a value proposition that ultimately makes it a more stable investment for owners. You know, if you tell an owner who has a lifetime or close to it of experience owning an NFL team, where not only do you get to play in the NFL if you finish last the following year, but you get the number one draft pick. It's a very difficult conversation to explain to them that if they have a lousy year on the field, they'll be playing at a lower level the following season. And I understand there are all sorts of creative ways that leagues have come up with to soften that blow, whether it's parachute payments, media rights, dividend payments, you know, anything along those lines. But it doesn't change the inherent value of where you're going to compete at the next year. So determining things by sporting merit only in terms of what league you're going to play in the following year, it's obviously it's not part of any other sport in the U.S. landscape. And while it is at the very heart of the game of soccer worldwide, I think that as far as MLS is concerned, I just don't think it's realistic given the owner's investment. They, you know, most of them, well, I shouldn't say most, a certain percentage of them have been around since the league's inception in 96, and X number have joined since that point. So I think that there's an expectation when they got into the league that promotion and relegation was not going to be part of the conversation, at least in the way that we all understand it. That being said, there's all sorts of creative ways to create drama, whether it's a playoff push, you know, MLS decision day, you know, whatever it may be. But when it comes to where you're going to play the next season, it's tough for me to picture that changing anytime soon.
No, I agree with you.
No matter how much fans may want it.
No, of course, including myself. I'm sure, like you, again, from the fans' perspective, right? Because I always look at it from a fan's perspective. Of course, the investors have to look at it from a business perspective. Completely understandable.
Yes.
What about being able to sell your players for a profit, right? Do you think that is more feasible than the promotion relegation?
It definitely is, and we're starting to see that. You know, over the year and a half existence of League One, you've had some transfers for a profit. You know, nothing massive by any stretch, but just the fact that teams have been able to turn a profit on a player that they signed for free and then sold for a transfer fee is an indicator that it can work and can happen. So I would offer that. You know, it all comes down to valuation, right? So if you have a player that you say internally that you would part with for 20, 25, 30,000, and you get an offer for 5 or 10,000, there's nothing forcing you, of course, unless you wrote it into the contract, that says that you've got to let that player move on. But on the flip side of that, then you've got a disgruntled player who feels that the opportunity to play at a higher level was ultimately denied to them. So there's a balancing act there for sure. But when it comes to the profitability of the club, you know, it's going to be very interesting over the next couple of years to see how teams, and this isn't just unique to League One, of course, this is Championship as well, and MLS, although MLS has obviously a different structure inherently, how many of them reinvest those profits into the payroll of the team. You know, you hear about that a lot in Europe and around the world, that their budget was X, they sold a player for Y. Does their budget now increase by Y? And in some cases around the world, or I don't know if it's a lot, I don't have the data there, that is what happens. And in some cases it's not. But in the U.S., traditionally, that's not the case. You know, that those profits from selling the player have ultimately not been reinvested, have not increased the player budget, and therefore there's less incentive to allow a player to move on other than reputation. Because, you know, you never want to get a reputation as a club that blocks every single sale of a player who ultimately, wants to test themselves at a higher level.
No, for sure. And then just going back to promotion and relegation really quick, don't you think that in the long run, though, you could see a potential positive return on investment if it was possible because of the fact that you would create sort of a more passionate fan base? Because and talking to people in Europe, right, that live there and they bleed, they're hungry for football all day long, right? That's the main thing, right? They're so passionate about it. They buy all the merchandise, they go to the stadium, they go watch all the games. Don't you think that turns a profit too, and that means something too? If more people are watching, are in tune, are talking about it, don't you think in the long run that could potentially be a good ROI?
Yes, it could long term, but remember that's not the culture that we have yet. So I could see that taking time.
I hear you on that. And what's next for Union Omaha in 2021?
Hopefully a full season and a trip back to the USL League One final, where this time we get to actually play the game and, of course, win it and reward the incredible fan base in the Omaha Metro for all of their patience and support and enthusiasm.
No, I hear you on that. I'm definitely looking forward to, seeing you guys out for a full season. Definitely very exciting, having a new team in the U.S. In general, and then obviously in USL League One. I have one more question for you, Matt. It's kind of off topic. I've been asking everyone this. What's the most embarrassing song you have on your playlist at the moment?
Ooh, great question. Embarrassing song. I'm a huge Jimmy Buffett fan. I don't know that I'd be embarrassed to tell anyone that Cheeseburger in Paradise is one of my favorites, but I think some people might think it's embarrassing.
I hear you on that for sure. Well, Matt, thanks for your time, man. I know you're always very busy. Stay safe out there, and we don't talk before the new year. Hope you have a great new year, and then, hope to touch base with you soon, all right?
My pleasure. Thanks for having me out.
Thank you so much, all right, Matt? Take care.